Anna Chamard, put that down and step out.
What's
The
going
banking
on?
information you obtained from residents, the withdrawals, the stolen property under your forged carry aids
You think
credentials.
that that's what
Once is a mistake, twice is suspicious. Anna Chamdal did this to 20 elderly victims across 3 cities over more than a year. And she kept going, even after police had already arrested her once.
20 victims across Surrey, Richmond, and White Rack, $60,000 a forged
God,
document.
you actually think no, you don't understand what that was. That wasn't.
She would not get the chance to explain. The Surrey RCMP Economic Crime Unit had executed the search warrant. They had her bank records, the credit cards in her purse that did not belong to her, and a growing list of names. Elderly people across the lower mainland who had opened their doors to a woman they believed was their care aide. 20 victims, $60,000, 65 charges, and the detail the Crown would later describe as the most disturbing aspect of the entire file. She would keep doing it after she was arrested, after she was released on conditions. While Sergeant Tammy Lobb's file sat open on her desk in Surrey, Anna Chamdal walked into the apartment of a 96-year-old woman in Richmond and did it again. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Would you let a stranger into your parents' apartment if she showed up with a clipboard, wore a lanyard, and said the home health agency had sent her over? Be honest in the comments. Tell me whether your mom or your dad or your grandmother would have let this woman in. And if you're not subscribed yet, fix that now. We cover the cases the national networks bury every single week, and the verdict on this one will stay with you. Anna Chamdal was born in 1981 in Jalandhar, in the Punjab region of northern India. Her family emigrated to Canada in 1985, when she was 4 years old, joining the wave of Punjabi families settling in the lower mainland of British Columbia. Her father drove a taxi out of the cab stand at Surrey Central Station. Her mother worked overnight cleaning shifts at Surrey Memorial Hospital, which would later become one of the strangest details on the file. A child who grew up watching her mother work the hospital floor. A child who knew what a care worker's uniform looked like, who understood the rhythms and the language of medical staff long before she ever exploited them. The family settled in the Newton neighborhood of Surrey, on a quiet street off 72nd Avenue, lined with stucco bungalows and a Sikh temple 2 blocks east. Anna attended Princess Margaret Secondary School. Her teachers remembered a polite, quiet girl. One report card from grade 9 described her as respectful, observant, and eager to help younger students. Another, 2 years later, noted she was occasionally distracted, but showed genuine kindness toward classmates in difficulty. Neither phrase would survive the courtroom. She graduated in 1999 and took her first job at a Save-On Foods on King George Highway, stocking shelves and working the front cashier lanes for $7.60 an hour. Co-workers later described her as good with older customers, patient, willing to walk them to the right aisle, willing to count change for them. She stayed for 3 years. She moved on to a retail position at the Bay in Guildford Town Centre, then to a part-time job at a Punjabi sweet shop on 8010th Avenue. None of the jobs lasted more than 2 years. None of the references followed her forward. In 2007, at age 26, she enrolled in a 6-month home support worker certificate program at a small private college in Surrey that has since closed. She completed the coursework. She passed the practicum. She received the certificate. For approximately 14 months between 2008 and 2009, she worked at a registered home care agency in Burnaby, providing in-home support to elderly clients across Metro Vancouver. Her file from that agency, which RCMP investigators would later retrieve, contained 2 complaints. One about a missing bracelet, one about an unexplained discrepancy in a client's bingo cash. Neither was substantiated. Neither was reported to the college. She left the agency in late 2009. The file says resignation, personal reasons. She would never work for a licensed agency again. For the next 12 years, her employment history is a sequence of gaps. A few months at a Tim Hortons in Whalley, a part-time position at a Surrey beauty supply, a short stint cleaning hotel rooms at a Best Western near YVR. By 2019, she was living in a basement suite on 132nd Street in Surrey, sharing the place with 2 roommates, listing no employer on her tax return. She was 40 years old. She had a home support worker certificate from a school that no longer existed. She had spent her 20s and 30s watching the demographic she had once been trained to serve grow older, wealthier, and more numerous across the Lower Mainland. And she had spent enough time inside the system to understand exactly how little it verified. That trust was about to be tested. The home care system in British Columbia rests on a foundation that almost nobody talks about until something goes wrong. That foundation is the front door. Across the Lower Mainland, on any given Tuesday morning, hundreds of care aides are walking into private apartments, condominium units, and independent living suites. Some are dispatched by Fraser Health. Some are dispatched by Vancouver Coastal Health. Some come from private agencies. Bayshore, Paramed, Nurse Next Door, a dozen smaller operators. Some are paid out of pocket by adult children who live in Calgary or Toronto and need someone to check on mom in Richmond every Wednesday and Saturday. Every one of those visits depends on the same simple proposition, that the person standing on the welcome mat is who she says she is. In British Columbia, healthcare assistants, the formal name for what most people still call care aides, are required to be registered with the BC Care Aide and Community Health Worker Registry. The registry exists. It works. It has photographs, certificate numbers, employer affiliations. Any agency dispatching a worker into a senior's home is required to verify that registration before the visit happens. But the verification is institutional. It happens between the agency and the registry. It does not happen at the doorway. The 88-year-old woman in the third-floor walk-up on 64th Avenue does not have access to the registry. She does not know how to check the registry. She does not know the registry exists. What she has, on the morning a stranger knocks, is the woman's smile, the woman's calm voice, the lanyard the woman is wearing, and the explanation the woman offers about which agency she is from. Your daughter called us. She was worried about how you've been managing your medications. The hospital sent me to follow up on your discharge. Fraser Health rotated me onto your file last week. None of those sentences requires identification to deliver. None of them requires a uniform. None of them requires the woman at the door to actually exist on any registry. They require only that the senior on the other side of the door wants to believe that someone, somewhere, has remembered her. The Lower Mainland has more than 300,000 residents over the age of 75. Of those, a substantial share live alone. Of those, a significant percentage have no adult child living in the same city. The arithmetic of vulnerability is straightforward. The system is built on trust because there is no other practical way to build it. And trust, by definition, is what the impostor exploits. No one noticed. No one checked. Until they did. The first documented incident in the Surrey RCMP file is dated December 14, 2021. The victim was an 83-year-old woman living in a ground-floor unit of a strata complex near 96th Avenue and Scott Road. She had been widowed for 11 years. Her son lived in Edmonton. She had recently been discharged from Surrey Memorial after a fall. According to the statement she would later provide to police, a woman matching Anna Chamdal's description knocked on her door at approximately 10:20 in the morning. The woman was wearing a navy blue cardigan, dark slacks, and a lanyard with a laminated identification card. She said her name was Aide. She said she was from a home care agency that the hospital had referred. She said she was there to check on the medications and to help with light housekeeping. The senior let her in. Over the course of approximately 90 minutes, the woman made tea, asked the senior how her recovery was going, looked through the medication blister pack, and asked gently whether the senior had been able to keep up with her bills since the hospital stay. She offered to help. She offered to take a quick look at the bank statements so she could flag anything to the senior's son. The senior brought out a stack of paperwork from a drawer in the kitchen. The woman left at approximately 11:50. She took no property that the senior noticed at the time. But over the next 8 days, 4 withdrawals totaling $4,200 left the senior's checking account at the TD branch on King George Boulevard. The senior did not notice for nearly 3 weeks. The pattern, once Surrey RCMP investigators reconstructed it, repeated with disturbing consistency. Step 1 was to identify a target. The exact targeting methodology was never fully established. Investigators believed Chamdal used a combination of obituary notices to identify recently widowed seniors, public record searches to locate the addresses, and in some cases, information she gleaned from the elderly community she had begun frequenting. Bingo halls in Whalley, senior centers on King George Boulevard, the lobby of the Punjabi market on Main Street, where elderly women gathered to gossip on benches outside the sweet shops. Step 2 was to approach in person. Chamdal would arrive at the front door, mid-morning, dressed in a manner consistent with a home care worker. She carried a clipboard. She wore a lanyard with a card that bore no logo and no registration number, but at a distance read as official. She delivered one of 3 stock lines. The daughter called. The hospital referred. The agency rotated her onto the file. Step 3 was to gain the kitchen. Once inside, the goal was to be invited to sit at the kitchen table. The kitchen table is where seniors keep their mail, their pill bottles, their bank statements, and their address books. Chamdal would offer to help organize. She would offer to help fill out a form. She would offer to help with the medication schedule. Step 4 was to extract the banking. Sometimes the victim showed her a checkbook. Sometimes the victim recited a PIN. In at least 4 documented cases, Chamdal photographed the front and back of a debit card with a cell phone while the senior was in the bathroom. In at least 2 cases, she simply removed the card and slipped it into her own purse, banking on the fact that the senior would not notice for days. Step 5 was to withdraw and disappear. Withdrawals were made from ATMs across the Lower Mainland, TD on Scott Road, RBC at Lansdowne Centre, Coast Capital at Semiahmoo. The withdrawals were spaced. They were kept below the threshold that typically triggers a fraud alert at most Canadian banks. They were designed to look like the senior's own activity until they weren't. By March 2022, there were 13 identified victims across Surrey alone. By the first week of April, there were 19. The smallest individual loss was $440. The largest was just over $11,000. The withdrawals were not the only theft. From one residence, she took a wallet containing $800 in cash. From another, a pair of gold bangles that had been the senior's mother's. From another, a Samsung cell phone left charging on the kitchen counter. She was, by every operational measure, very good at this. And then she walked into the wrong apartment. The exact triggering incident is not specified on the public record. What is established from the Surrey RCMP investigation timeline is that by the first week of April 2022, multiple complaints had reached the Economic Crime Unit and the pattern had been identified. The most probable surfacing route, according to investigators who would later describe the file, was a victim's daughter, a woman in her early 60s living in North Vancouver, who flew over to Surrey for what she expected to be a routine visit with her mother in early April. She found her mother distressed, confused about a series of withdrawals from the checking account, and unable to locate the gold bangles she had worn every day for 46 years. The daughter called the TD branch. The branch flagged the withdrawals as inconsistent with the account holder's normal patterns. The daughter then called the Surrey RCMP non-emergency line. The file was assigned to the Economic Crime Unit. Within 72 hours, the investigators had identified at least 4 additional victims who had reported similar incidents over the preceding 3 months. The descriptions overlapped. Middle-aged South Asian woman, navy cardigan, lanyard, soft voice, calls herself Anita, says she is from a home care agency. By April 10th, investigators had a name. By April 12th, they had a residence, a basement suite on 132nd Street. By the morning of April 13th, they had a search warrant. Surrey RCMP officers arrived at the basement suite at approximately 8:40 in the morning. Chamdal was home. She was arrested without incident. The search of the suite produced, according to the Crown's later summary on the file, multiple debit and credit cards in names other than hers, a quantity of jewelry that did not match her own personal collection, 3 cell phones for which she could provide no purchase record, a stack of handwritten notes containing names, addresses, and what investigators interpreted as visit dates, and a laminated identification card on a navy blue lanyard that bore no agency name and no registration number. Chamdal was processed. She was interviewed. She was released on conditions pending further investigation, on the standard British Columbia framework that applies to non-violent offenses, where the accused has no prior record and the Crown is continuing to build its case. The conditions included a curfew, a requirement to remain in the Lower Mainland, a prohibition on contact with any of the identified victims, and a prohibition on attending any care home, residential care facility, or assisted living complex in the province. She walked out of the detachment that afternoon. The file remained open on Sergeant Tammy Lobb's desk. The investigation continued. The Crown began assembling the evidence to support charges. Everyone involved assumed the conditions would hold. They did not hold. In June 2022, approximately 10 weeks after Chamdal's first arrest and conditional release, Surrey RCMP investigators received a complaint from a Richmond family. The complainant was the granddaughter of a 96-year-old woman who lived in an independent living suite in a seniors complex off Number 3 Road. The granddaughter had flown out from Toronto for what she expected to be a quiet weekend visit. Her grandmother greeted her cheerfully, mentioned a nice woman from the agency who had come by the week before, and asked, in passing, where the gold ring her late husband had given her on their 40th anniversary had gone. The granddaughter checked the bank account. 2 withdrawals totaling $1,600 had been made at a TD branch in Surrey 6 days earlier. The grandmother had not left her building in 9 days. The description the grandmother provided matched the description already on file. Soft voice, navy cardigan, lanyard, South Asian woman in her late 30s or early 40s. Calls herself Anita. Then came a second complaint from White Rock. A 95-year-old woman in a ground-floor garden suite near the pier had been visited by a care aide she did not recognize. The woman had a credit card missing. The bank statement, when her son retrieved it, showed 3 charges at retail locations in Surrey, none of which the senior had visited. The Crown approved a fresh round of charges. The Surrey RCMP Economic Crime Unit obtained a new arrest warrant. On February 1st, 2023, officers rearrested Aide Chamdal. This time there would be no release on conditions. The Crown opposed bail. The court agreed. She was remanded into custody, where she would remain for the next 18 months. When the full case file was assembled for the Crown, it contained 6 categories of evidence. The bank records establishing unauthorized withdrawals from the accounts of 20 different elderly victims across Surrey, Richmond, and White Rock. The property loss reports detailing the missing cell phones, jewelry, wallets, cash, and credit cards. The photo lineups in which 12 of the 20 victims had identified Chamdal as the woman who had attended their residences. The physical evidence recovered from the April of 2022 search of the basement suite, including the lanyard, the handwritten notes, and the unaccounted-for cards and phones. The timeline establishing that conduct had continued after the April 13th arrest in direct breach of the release conditions. And the multi-jurisdictional pattern reconstruction, prepared by Sergeant Tammy Lobb and her unit, that mapped the visits geographically and chronologically across 5 months of activity. On January 30th, 2023, 2 days before the rearrest, the Crown approved 65 fraud and assault-related charges against Aide Chamdal. They spanned 5 sections of the Criminal Code of Canada. They covered every victim. They covered every category of conduct. They covered the period before the first arrest and the period after. We're heading into the courtroom now. Before we do, I want to say this directly. If this story has held your attention this long, that's because it deserved to be told properly. Stories about elderly victims do not get the coverage they deserve in this country. They get a paragraph at the bottom of page 7, and then they disappear. Subscribe to this channel. We cover the cases the networks won't, every single week, and the verdict on this one will make sure you remember Aide Chamdal's name long after the video ends. The most operationally significant confrontation in the file is not the arrest. It is a recorded interview conducted on the afternoon of February 1st, 2023, in Interview Room 2 of the Surrey RCMP Newton Detachment, approximately 90 minutes after Anna Chamdal's rearrest. Sergeant Tammy Lobb was present. So was a second investigator from the Economic Crime Unit. So was the recording equipment that captures every interview conducted in that room. The first portion of the interview followed standard format. Identification confirmed. Rights to counsel confirmed. Acknowledgement that counsel had been contacted. Acknowledgement that the interview was being recorded. Chamdal sat across the table in a gray hooded sweatshirt and jeans, her hands folded on the laminate surface, her expression neutral. The questions began. Sergeant Lobb: Ms. Chamdal, in April of last year, you were arrested and released on conditions. Do you remember the conditions? I remember. One of those conditions was that you would not attend any care home or residential facility for seniors. Correct? Correct. I want to talk to you about a woman in Richmond, 96 years old, lives on number 3 Road. Do you know who I'm talking about? Chamdal did not answer. She looked at her hands. I want to talk to you about a woman in White Rock, 95, lives near the pier. Do you know who I'm talking about? I'd like to speak to my lawyer. We've already contacted your lawyer. You spoke to him. The interview is voluntary. You can stop at any time. I'm asking you if you visited those women. I'd like to speak to my lawyer again. The interview ended at that point. According to the officers in the room, Chamdal did not make eye contact for the remainder of the procedural conclusion. She was escorted from Interview Room 2 to processing, and from processing to a cell, and from the cell to the prisoner transport vehicle that would carry her to Surrey pretrial. Those were the last words she spoke to any investigator on the file. Anna Chamdal remained in custody from February 1st, 2023, through her sentencing date on August 26, 2024, a period of approximately 18 months, in pre-sentence custody at Alouette Correctional Center for Women in Maple Ridge. Her defense counsel, Vancouver criminal lawyer Reza Mahmoudi, filed pre-trial motions challenging the admissibility of identification evidence in several of the smaller loss cases. The motions were partially successful. 3 of the original 65 charges were withdrawn before trial. The remaining 62 proceeded. In the spring of 2024, after extensive Crown defense negotiation, Chamdal entered guilty pleas to the core counts. Multiple counts of fraud over $5,000. Multiple counts of being unlawfully in a dwelling house. Multiple counts of theft of credit cards. And the single count of possession of a forged document arising from the laminated identification card on the Navy lanyard. The assault counts, arising from physical contact in 2 of the residences that the victims described as forceful but not injurious, were also entered as guilty pleas. The sentencing hearing was held on August 26, 2024, in British Columbia Provincial Court in Surrey, before the Honourable Judge Marlene Whitcomb. The Crown was represented by Senior Crown Counsel Devin Chowdhury. The hearing ran for nearly 4 hours. 12 victim impact statements were read into the record, 8 in person. 4 by family members on behalf of victims who had since passed away or were physically unable to attend. The statement that the court reporter would later describe as the one that changed the room was read by the granddaughter of the 96-year-old woman from Richmond. My grandmother survived the partition of India in 1947. She survived crossing the Indian Ocean on a steamship in 1953. She survived raising 5 children in a 1-bedroom apartment in East Vancouver, while my grandfather worked 2 jobs. She did not survive the woman who sat at her kitchen table and stole the ring my grandfather gave her on their 40th anniversary. She passed away in October of 2023. She asked me, near the end, whether the police had found the ring. I told her they were still looking. I am still telling her that. Judge Whitcomb's sentencing remarks ran approximately 19 minutes. 3 sentences from those remarks were quoted in every newspaper that covered the file. Ms. Chamdal, you weaponized the single most precious commodity that elderly individuals living alone in this province have left to give, their trust. You did so with planning, with patience, and with a deliberate operational sophistication that this court has rarely encountered. You did so against 20 victims, the oldest of whom was 96 years of age, and you continued doing so after this very court system arrested you, charged you, and released you on conditions, demonstrating not merely a disregard for those conditions, but a contempt for them. The sentence was 4 years in federal custody, less 18 months credit for pre-sentence time served, followed by 2 years of probation. Restitution was ordered in the amount of $60,000. Chamdal was transferred from Alouette to the Fraser Valley Institution for Women in Abbotsford, the federal facility where women serving sentences of 2 or more years are held in British Columbia. With statutory release calculations, her earliest custodial release date is in the spring of 2026. The Surrey RCMP file remains open in one respect. Of the property recovered during the April 2022 search, the majority was never matched to a specific victim. The gold ring the 96-year-old woman from Richmond wore for 46 years has never been recovered. This case was disturbing, but the case on your screen right now, the one I'm pointing to, what that woman did to her own clients makes Anna Chamdal look like an amateur. Click it.